Morning, guys. Good to see you again. Today we got an important subject to talk about. We've gone all through the process of getting to a stand site from camp or your car, doing everything, taking all the precautions necessary to get there so that you have a chance of taking a big buck, and then all the precautions concerned with getting up into that tree stand, and while you're sitting up there and you did everything right. And one of two things happened. Here came a big buck and you got it. That was one. You hope that happens often, and it will if you do these things properly. But there's certainly going to be plenty of times when no buck showed up. And there's reasons why that happened. Plenty of reasons. But usually the reason is that without you knowing about it, the buck smelled you or saw you or heard you, or it came up behind you and watched you for a while. Smart bucks do that all the time. It may even have batted some distance away where it could keep an eye on your stand site, or it just happened that it was that way and he was able to see you and identify you while he was bedded. Lots of reasons. Or the doe that it was with was no longer an estrus, and now it's with another doe, maybe as much as a mile away from where you're sitting. Those things happen, so it can't be helped. In our deer camp, we have a basic rule when stand hunting. Our rule is that if you sit within easy shooting distance of very fresh tracks and or droppings made by a big buck, or say a freshly renewed ground scrape, or a feeding area in which there are very fresh tracks of a big buck and perhaps very fresh tracks of a doe with young in the feeding area. Any of those places, if you sit there for a half day without seeing any of those deer, or the big buck, especially the big buck, and you don't see the big buck, it means he knows you're there. That's our rule. He knows you're there. And so from this point on, after a half day of hunting there without seeing that buck, it would be a waste of time to continue hunting there. And so if we don't see anything like that, we plan to move to another stand site during the second half day of hunting. And sometimes it might have worked out that if we went back to the same stand site and hunted another half day for no particular reason, we might still have a chance to take a buck there during that second half day. And sometimes even during the third half day that can happen. But generally, you're going to see a lot more bucks, have a lot more opportunities to take bucks if you assume that the buck you were trying to get during the half day of hunting has got you pegged, in which case you have no chance of taking that buck. So moving every half day gives you many more opportunities to take mature bucks. Now, you might not believe that at first, but after a while, you're going to believe it. But this is not an ironclad rule in our camp. There are several reasons why we might decide to come back or even stay there, not even go back to camp at lunchtime. And one of the reasons might be that, gee, it's warm. I'm talking about hunting in northern states where you can get 6 to 25 below zero on a cold morning during the deer hunting season, and snow on the ground, that kind of hunting. If you've had several days of really frigid weather, or maybe stormy weather or windy weather, and the deer just weren't moving, and then one day you have a thaw or near thaw during the day. We have a weather radio in our camp. One of the first things we do every morning upon arising turn that on and get the latest weather report. And if the weatherman says, well, today there's going to be a high of 28 degrees and winds will be calm or light, it doesn't matter whether it's sunny or cloudy. If you get that kind of a weather forecast, it means that day you're going to have a midday feeding cycle. After several days of cold weather and then no wind and a thaw or near thaw, almost always triggers feeding for 1 to 2 hours in the middle of the day. Now later on in winter, like in December, if you're out there a bow hunter or a muzzleloader hunter in December, sticking to hunting until the very end, the end of December, there's going to be lots of days where you're going to have midday feeding, even if you don't have a lot of cold weather before it happens. Like, let's say here's a week, boy, it's kind of a December thaw going on here, and it goes several days in a row, every single day, whether there's really cold weather, really sub-zero weather or not. Anytime you have a thaw or near thaw or temperatures even above that, and the wind's calm or light, like it is outside here today, and I see water dripping off the eaves of the house here, you're going to have a midday feeding cycle. It isn't an everyday thing in November, in the beginning of winter, but in December when you start getting a lot of cold weather, any kind of weather like that will cause midday feeding. And usually that feeding occurs between 11 o'clock and 2 to 3, sometimes as late as 3. But whenever it occurs, it's going to only last 1 to 2 hours. But you get a massive number of deer feeding on a day like that. Sometimes on those particular days we see more deer and take more big bucks than almost any other time during the hunting season. We usually have to work harder when we don't have midday feeding going on. So yeah, be aware of that. And have a weather radio handy, and if you hear that weather forecast in the morning, pack a lunch. Don't come back to camp. Don't take the precaution of not having or not doing something you shouldn't do, or accidentally running into a big buck on the way to camp, or coming back to your stand site after eating back in camp at noon. Stay put. If you go back to camp, you're going to probably miss out on this whole midday feedings cycle. So on days like that, stay out there, have lunch in your stand, and something that doesn't have a lot of odor to it, maybe just bologna sandwiches with lettuce and a tomato or something on it, mayonnaise, a couple of those, and maybe some soft cookies, not the crunchy kind, but maybe some fruit. Apple can be pretty noisy to eat out in the tree stand. I love to take apples with me, but only after I usually don't eat an apple in a tree stand, but if I take a buck and it's out there at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'll take a break and eat my apple before heading back to camp, something like that. And apples should be in a plastic bag to keep the odor from spreading out behind you downwind. But anyway, midday feeding cycles are a reason for staying in your stand midday and hunting much later. In fact, you can have the midday feeding and you stay out there, and then in the afternoon, maybe 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, all the deer come out and start feeding again. If you're sitting by a feeding area where deer are currently feeding and you haven't alarmed them yet, or they haven't gotten you pegged there yet, that's a place where you should be spending your time, even after a midday feeding cycle. Hunt there right until it's dark in the evening, half hour after sunset. So, good day to stay in the stand. If you can stand it, if you're a real experienced stand hunter and you've learned how to put up with all those hours sitting in one place, well, do it. during weather conditions like that. Now, there might be other reasons, like, for example, you're sitting in your stand in the morning and you see some deer. You get little sightings of deer, and you see a doe and fawn going out there, and then across the space, maybe it was too far from your stand, too far, and too much foliage and branches in between to take an iffy shot, and you decide, I'll pass that up and hope for a better shot later. In that case, if you see, absolutely, if you see a doe that's in estrus, which will be proven by the fact that a big buck is accompanying it or following it, that doe is going to be feeding there in the afternoon, and probably 3, 4 o'clock it'll start feeding there, and that buck is going to be with it. That might be another reason why you might decide, rather than take a chance of spooking those deer going and coming back again in the middle of the day, I'll just stay right here. And that would be a really good reason for staying in your stand site. Another one, it gets me once in a while. I go out there in the morning, I found this place the day before, or maybe 2 weeks before. It depends on what part of the season is. Most of the stand sites I use are found while scouting 2 weeks before the beginning of this hunting season. By the 3rd day, I've used those stand sites up, and now I'm starting to use new stand sites that I find during the course of the hunting season. And we'll be talking more about that soon. But at any rate, if I come out there and in the morning and to the stand site, let's say I found a really fresh tracks coming to this site the day before, and that's why I'm here. And I get there in the morning, and there's a lot more tracks fresh that were just made maybe an hour or less before you got there, really fresh. And these are walking deer. They weren't trotting or running. They weren't alarmed, and you don't see those deer. Well, it might be they're feeding in a part of the feeding area that you can't see. Well, that's fine. That doesn't mean you should be out there around the edge where you can see way down there and way down there. That's a terrible place to be stand hunting at a feeding area, right next to the edge. We've learned through years of research on this that you're always much better off if your stand site is 10 to 20 yards from the edge, hidden by intervening cover between you and the edge of the feeding area or a farm field or whatever. So anyway, there might be a lot of reasons why you don't get a good chance to take a shot at a deer next to a feeding area. But if they're out there, if you've seen deer or all these fresh tracks, and the first time you go to your stand site, that too could be a really good reason to come back after lunch or to stay there the rest of the day, because all this increasing activity that was just done means that those deer haven't found you yet, and your odds of being able to take one there are pretty good. So I'd want to stay there at that stand site for the rest of the day, or I'd go back to camp and come back after lunch. Now, one of the things you're probably puzzled about here is how do you find all these fresh signs during a hunting season without spooking the deer you want to take, the buck you'd like to take? And that's our next lesson. And there's a lot to know about how do you do that properly. So we'll be getting to that, but it can be done. You can do it every day of a hunting season. You can do it every day to find your next stand sites, and use stand sites just once every half day. So, well, that's an important thing to learn about, really, really important. Doing this kind of hunting and using that technique to find new stand sites every day during hunting season is the basics for my newest and best hunting method called opportunistic stand hunting. And you're going to learn much more about that in the future. But let's just say, well, we were here all morning, we didn't say anything, it's time to go back to camp for lunch, but we don't just go back to camp for lunch. we usually leave our stands around 11, and then uh, I, before we go back to camp, we use that hour between 11 and 12 to cruise in search of very fresh signs of older bucks. And those trails that we use, like our cruise trails and our stand site approach trails, to find those things on the way back before we get to camp, are how we find those signs during a hunting season. And sometimes some of our cruise trails are pretty extensive. They cover a good part of the big oval-shaped set of connecting deer trails that we use for these things. And the length of one oval can be up to 2 miles in length. You got a lot of country to go through and use certain techniques to do it. So next time we get together, I'm going to be talking to you about that, cruising in search of fresh signs made by mature bucks during the course of a hunting season. But anyway, and that's different. You use a different technique than you used when you went to the stand site in some ways, and something to learn. So with that, guys, that's the end of today's lesson. And something I'd like to tell you before we cut off right here. Hold on a second. What I wish you would do is subscribe to my YouTube channel. Right here. And it only takes a minute, and it doesn't cost you anything. And by doing that, you'll be notified the minute I post a new YouTube presentation. So that'll be something to your advantage. Well, with that, thank you guys. I'll see you again soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries. And be sure to sign up for my email updates. Here you will also find deer and bear hunting articles, my website bookstore, and much more.